Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Because Football podcast. Today, our guest is Andy Watson. Andy is the owner and founder of GBE Expert Hub. What is GBE? Some of you might be wondering. As an American, I don't have a clue. Andy is going to parse it all out for us, as well as some of his background and how he's able to provide value to football clubs. So we're really excited for this. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. Really pleasure to be here, calling you from sunny Stockton-on-Tees today in the UK. So sorry about the lighting issues that we've got. I look very dark on this screen compared to you. You look beautiful and
All
fresh
good.
faced.
It's atmospheric. We're
Yeah,
really
exactly.
getting into. We can feel the dampness outside. We can sense the salvation in that cup of tea. Warming your bones. So we're fully
Well,
immersed. But
those people who know the northeast of England will know that it's never usually sunny. So I chanced my arm today to set up here, and it's turned out actually nice for a change. So yeah, I'm glad to be on the podcast. Obviously, yes, I will explain what GBE is. It has become very important in the UK kind of football scene over the last few years.
yeah, before we get to all of that, I want to start with the personal side, right? Some of your background. I know you mentioned you're originally from Blackburn. So one
Yeah.
thing I would love to know is, what's your earliest memory of football?
You know what my earliest memory of football? No one's ever asked me that before, but it's probably Manchester United related. It's when they won the Cup Winners' Cup against Barcelona in 1991, I think it was, or 1990. That was the first time that I ever remember really watching football on TV, and then that was closely followed by the World Cup in 1990. Well, around about the same sort of time. So these are things that are
Sure.
all kind of like congregated in my 5-year-old brain. My house will be full of people who are, reacting to this thing that I'm seeing on the screen, this vision of green and the red of Manchester United or the blue of Italy or the white of England. And I'm like, this is amazing. Like, people are jumping off the sofa, people are shouting at the screen, and I'm like, what on earth is going on? So I
Exactly.
knew at that point that it was something that was really exciting. And then you start going out onto the street and kicking a ball around, and you're getting the feel of what it's like to be involved in it. And then my dad started taking me to Blackburn Rovers matches. At the time, it wasn't all seater. It was before before the mandate where everything had to be changed to all seater in the UK.
Right.
So we were
Right.
behind fencing on the terraces, me and my cousin, and again, like, just the sounds and the smells and the visuals of up
Yeah.
to the ground, and being lifted up by my dad so I could actually see stuff, and the almost like euphoria of a goal going in, and everyone just around you standing up and jumping and hugging each other, and yeah, so it got me from a very early age, and really, I wouldn't be where I am at the moment without any of that. And I think sometimes when you do work in the game, and I think a lot of people will understand this who are listening in, it can be difficult when you're embroiled in it to remember that joy and to bring it
Yeah.
back to,
Yeah.
the reason that we love the game so much is the feelings and the stuff that it instills in us.
So I love that answer. And the thing that sticks out, you were really reacting, and what you mentioned, you're really reacting to like how it was affecting people, which I think is really, really insightful in and of itself. And then you make a great point of like, when you're working in the game, when you're relying on it to pay the bills, right? Especially when you're at that level, football is such a tough industry to be in, right? It's like, are there certain times, certain moments that remind you of more of that initial passion, or is it something you kind of have to like bring into your mindfulness routines?
Yeah, it's difficult. Like, I've been working in mainly in recruitment, so you do get to watch a lot of football, like in that sphere. Although I'm more on the data side, I'm sure we'll touch on that later. So there is a little bit more spreadsheets and numbers and coding involved rather than the pure joy of football. So, but at the end of the day, I'm still a football fan. I'm a supporter of Blackburn Rovers still. So I try and I guess, and I took my children to the match. We live near Middlesbrough Football Club, and so I took them
Okay.
to Middlesbrough versus Blackburn Rovers a couple of weeks ago. and it was my daughter's first game. It was my son's probably 10th
Cool.
game. So, like being with them and seeing them experience these things for the first time is a real privilege. And I think I put a social media post out saying, you know, actually this has reminded me of why I'm in this and why we do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is difficult to try and bring that into your day-to-day practices, especially like you say, when the pressure is on and results mean everything. Um, so you know, yeah, anytime that you can try and connect with that, out those feelings and that passion, is definitely time well spent.
Yeah. That's awesome. Was there a particular aspect of the match day experience that seemed to really connect with your daughter?
Well, it was the chanting from the crowd. So I went into we went into the away section, because
Cool.
obviously I'm a Blackburn supporter, and so we were away. Like they had been to the Riverside Stadium before, but with the home fans. So it was interesting having her in the away section because I don't know how many people have been in like UK away sections, but there's a lot of chanting goes on, and some of it isn't very nice. And some choice words are used, and she's only 6. So, but bless her, she's so innocent that like she's trying to work out. I could see her all the time trying to work out what people are saying. But because she doesn't really know these words, she can't like piece it all together. So I'm trying to just make up any old thing that sounds like what they're saying to try and explain to her what's going on. There's a lot of bad songs about Burnley, a lot of bad songs about other people in the crowd. But there was also really joyous moments. Obviously, when we scored, Blackburn won the game 1-0, and they scored right in front of us. Like so, everyone going up, the noise that I was throwing her in the air.
Yeah.
And then at the end, all the players came over, and we were right near the front, and we were kind of giving them applause, and she was well into it. And I think a couple of the players looked at her and applauded her. So, I could tell that she absolutely loved it. And to be honest, it was the best money that I've probably spent this year. Just the
Awesome.
pure like joy and emotion, and they want to go back. So
Exactly. Well done, Dad. Sounds like a great weekend out, and I'm cracking up with her trying to sort out the chants. I was in the UK like a month ago now. I recognize some of the chants from TV, from the internet, from my own like nerdy research and obsession of football. But there were some new ones, and my wife and I were just like crack. It's just great banter and like comedy, and it's hilarious. So I really appreciate that. And so speaking of Blackburn Rovers, they were always kind of in my mind because of Brad Friedel being an American. So I'm
yeah,
curious for you.
Brad Friedel was absolute legend. Like he's the best goalkeeper we've ever had. Like
That's what I was
historic.
going to ask is how he stacks up. So that's awesome to hear.
For a while, I hosted a Blackburn Rovers fan podcast, and we would sometimes get interviews with some of the Blackburn Rovers players. And Brad Friedel spent an hour and 15 minutes with me talking about his
Awesome.
entire career. Obviously, a lot of that we talked about Blackburn, but we also talked about his time at Liverpool and in Turkey and for the US national team. What a wonderful man! I don't know if you've ever had the privilege of speaking to him yourself, but
Haven't no
he's a
it'll
great
be
guy.
awesome.
And he was a magnificent goalkeeper as well.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that because he was also like one of the I feel like one of the earlier like there weren't a lot of players in like the 90s, early 2000s from the States playing over in England or in Europe in general. And he was there like quite a while, I know, before going, I think before he went to Spurs or after, I don't remember, but definitely was like always one for us who we watched and kept an eye on. We're like could be proud to see, okay, like we're it's mostly goalkeepers now, but we've got some guys playing over the pond. So that's cool to hear that he holds such esteem for you.
Yeah,
So
you,
what
you
I'm
talk about like kind of first memories of football and things, and my first season of remembering Blackburn Rovers, we did have a US international playing for us. This is going to test a lot of people's memories. Is Roy Wegerle? He played for
okay,
the
I know the name.
States in
Yeah,
in the 90s, and he was a fantastic technical footballer. He also played for Coventry, I think, in the UK. But yeah, he was a part of the Rovers team in 92, 93, and I always remember him. He scored a few goals. We beat Norwich 7-0 very early on it was the first ever Premier League season, and he was magnificent in that game. So that's another American that's represented Rovers.
very cool. Yeah, he's one I recognize the name just from like Wikipedia and looking through, but he's kind of part of that pre 94 generation
Yeah.
that, for me, I was born in '90, so I was young, but like the US men's national team in general was so obscure before that time. And then somehow we just got gifted the World Cup. So it was like, hey guys, you're going to be in the World Cup now. But obviously the MLS didn't exist at that time, that age.
And I guess, you guys are coming up to that time again with the World Cup looming on the
Exactly.
horizon. And I
Yeah.
imagine that the excitement is starting to build there. But yeah, really interesting times.
Yeah, so cool. So then give us like a snapshot. I'm sure there's a lot of twists and turns from, from your first Blackburn matches, and even the 7-0 against Norwich that you mentioned in early '90s. Give us an idea of kind of what led you up to this point with starting GBE Expert Hub, and kind of some
Yeah.
of that experience and those skills you developed throughout football.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my whole thing in my life is really basically about maths and sport. So all of my education, I went to, sixth form college and did maths, and then went to university and did sport. So I've always been oscillating between these two things in my
Hmm.
life. And that's kind of continued into my careers. So I was a maths teacher in secondary schools, 11 to 16-year-olds, and that was a few years. And then I moved from that into bookmaking, which obviously involves a lot of data and sport as well.
Yeah.
And then once I was made redundant in December 2018 from
Okay.
bookmaking. So at that point, I took some time to work out what it is that I really wanted to kind of go on and do in my life. And I started at that point posting quite a lot on social media about football and data, and equating a lot of it to Blackburn Rovers, but some of it was to Premier League, some of it was to world football.
Hmm.
And eventually, I started to gain a following and a bit of a notoriety about as someone who can use data to find interesting players or
Sure.
to create insights basically into the game. So as that kind of continued on, I started getting more and more contacts within the game, and then started to get work and jobs in the game. So I started writing about things for websites, and I pitched an idea to John McKenzie, who is now involved in T4 and the Athletic. He's one of the kind of preeminent tactics, um, social media gurus.
Okay.
At the time, he was working for Analytics FC as the content editor, and so I pitched him an idea that this was in 2021, where the Brexit regulations had just come in the UK.
Hmm.
Um, we won't go into the politics of it, but basically, obviously, the UK voted to leave the European Union, and
Yes.
then eventually the rules had to change as regards immigration. So previously, anybody who played football in the European Union that was a member of the European Union that wanted to come and play football in the UK, it was easy to do because there's something called freedom of movement within the EU,
Mm.
which means that as long as you are eligible to work in one EU country, you're also eligible to do it in a different EU country. Obviously, that kind of broke down between the UK and the EU. So then there needed to be a system put in place to replace that, which is finally where we're getting to what GBE stands for. So
Here we go.
GBE is the governing body endorsement. So in this case, we've got the FA who run football in England, and they are the governing body in this case, and they will endorse a player to come and play in this country and recommend to the Home Office, who is in charge
Okay.
of immigration, that this player is good enough or has the right kind of tools to work in this country as a footballer. And the way that is done is either through an auto pass, or there might be an established international for a high ranking FIFA nation, in which case that's fine. In other cases, they might not have that auto pass, they might not be an international, but they still are good enough to come and play. So the FA instigated a points based system in which if a player gets 15 points in that system, then they are also eligible for a GBE, and therefore the Home Office can grant them a work permit to come and play in this country. So I was very interested in how this had affected recruitment in the UK,
Absolutely.
not just in England. So I pitched to John McKenzie this idea that we could look at this. It was just going to be 4 articles on the website, and that was that. And he said it sounds like a good idea. We'll call it Brexit Ball. So the Brexit Ball series was born on Analytics FC, and it lasted much more than the 4 articles. And in the end, actually, in 2022, we authored a policy document, basically like almost 100 pages of the impact that Brexit had had on recruitment in the UK
Okay.
football wise. That document is still available to download on Analytics FC if anybody does want to read it. Although obviously it's 2 years out of date now, but I'm sure some people will still find it interesting. And then I've kind of continued to develop that knowledge and that skill. And obviously, as we've gone on, there's more insights to be drawn, and there's more like information out there. Obviously, since then as well, I've also worked with Blackburn Rovers in their recruitment department as a data recruitment consultant. I helped them to set their data system up in the first, like their new data system up, and then we were
Okay.
using that to try and identify good talent all over the world, and kind of using my expertise as a data recruitment experts just to try and guide the team in the right direction in terms of bringing in the right players. So yeah, it's been a long journey, but it's been a gradual rise into kind of the position that I'm in now. So once I've completed my time with Blackburn Rovers, I had a bit more freedom to then think about what my next move was going to be. And I didn't want to necessarily go straight back into another club, so I established this GBE Expert Hub where I'm able to take all the knowledge that I just mentioned and put it into one place. So it's content. There's free content out there. I know you looked at it like briefly yourself. We put in a lot of information out there to try and bring people to the platform. It will remain free, so people can come at any time and see and get some really useful information.
Really cool. So I love how you kind of took what I'm sure at first was quite a disappointment with being made redundant, being laid off from full-time job, and then kind of took that opportunity to just post about something that you're interested in, that you have skill, knowledge, and background in, and you just kind of maybe forced your way into things. You just
Yeah.
didn't ask for permission. You just started putting things out there and gaining connections, which I think is awesome. It's a really amazing story of kind of how you just went for it yourself. With what you were mentioning of the GBE, I just want to kind of clarify for the audience too. So the home office is like the official government office and department that ultimately gives permission for a footballer to make a move to work. But that recommendation comes from the FA based on their judging criteria. Is that right?
You've nailed it. Yeah. So yeah, previously obviously it wasn't an issue, like I say, with the European membership of the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
I say it wasn't an issue. If a Premier League club did want to sign a player, and they have signed players from, I don't know, Brazil, the US,
Yeah, we remember some stories back in the
Japan.
day. Yeah, with like guys from Africa, South America, who was like it was age or whatever, and it seemed tough then. But obviously, any players from the EU, it was much more open.
Yeah, exactly. So in a way, it's almost like applying that structure just to everybody rather than just to players outside of the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
It was really pretty much the case that you could only sign a player who wasn't in the EU if they were like an international player or had some international recognition, because that was the easiest way, I think, for the FA to say, look, this player is obviously good enough to come and play, which obviously prevented a lot of talented players to come and play in the first place, because it was much more difficult to get in. So in a way, this has been a good thing like for instance, let's take the MLS as an example. Like if you wanted to sign a player from the MLS, they had to be obviously a US or a Mexican international, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever nation they were playing for. You couldn't have signed necessarily just a regular, as you would say, MLS player.
Yeah.
But you can now. You can, anyone who's playing a certain percentage of minutes in the MLS can be signed by any club in England, because the number of points that they get as a result of that, because the MLS is in band 3. I haven't even touched on bandings yet, but
I don't know if
basically
I don't
the
know if we're
league.
gonna get to all of that. I'm definitely gonna
Yeah,
try to like send a link or put a link in the description, or people can kind of independently look to like some of those details, because I know it has some
yeah,
of the
yeah,
criteria is age, it's appearances, it might be certain achievements. But you make an interesting point where previously it was almost like clubs were a little bit limited. Clubs in the UK were a little limited. They had to wait until a player was making like international appearances for the full national team or something. what happens in that case? Values are going up, so they're having to pay more. They're not able to find like the value, the diamonds in the rough. It's an interesting point you make of it, actually, it opening the maybe the number of players and the possibilities. Even though yes, there are restrictions, some of them might actually be more beneficial than they had been in the past.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head again there. Like they are still restricted, but in a very different way than they were before. Like in terms of who they can actually target and bring in. There's a lot more avenues, and just suffice to say that the whole world is a target market now for English clubs where it couldn't be
Mm-hmm.
pre-Brexit. So those people who are kind of for Brexit would say that this isn't something that was even an opportunity to do before
Yeah.
the legislation was passed. Other people obviously have a different view where it was much easier to sign European players, which obviously is where a lot of talented football players reside. But it is much more difficult outside of the main countries, so your Italy, Spain, Germany. It is more difficult to sign players from countries outside of that. So as always with these things, some people are benefited and some people are handicapped.
And so you mentioned too, like the amount of data that goes into finding these players, right? Like obviously the criteria is important because clubs need to be aware of that. They need to have a sense of if this player even qualifies to make it worthwhile. But I know with some of the data analytics you use in recruitment, you mentioned some of like the financial modeling you've done, performance modeling. Like are clubs even watching, like are they watching video and then finding data? Is it like they're just, does a club decide on like a certain profile for a certain position of like we want x amount of kilometers run per match, this passing accuracy, x, y, and z, like what their key metrics are, and then they're trying to index that and find out. We hear so much obviously about data in the world, but especially football, it's only becoming more pivotal to decision making. But like what in your experience has kind of been that key of data in the recruitment side of things?
This is a huge question. I apologize in advance if I go over any of your other questions in answering it, because there's so many aspects to it. So obviously, I do kind of specialize in data recruitment, and as you correctly identify, it's become something that's obviously become more and more important. All over the world in terms of like finding the right players for your club. Obviously, in the past, we would rely on eye scouting, and there's still a place for that. And I don't want to like denigrate or demean anything like that, because that is still pivotal. But
Mm-hmm.
what you can do, and what a lot of clubs are doing now, is to kind of like put some scaffolding in place for those scouts. So, in my mind, this is how an organised football club at the current moment in time will approach their recruitment: is that they have profiles in their squad that they need to fill. And whether that is decided upon by the director of football or the head coach or a mixture of the two, usually, and how they want to set that squad up in terms of also ages and experience and wages and balancing all that out. So, what I like to tell clubs and what I would advise clubs is that they have in their minds what their perfect squad would look like if they had a
Mm-hmm.
completely blank slate and they were building their perfect squad. What would that look like? What type of players would you need for different roles? Do you want a replica of your first 11 as another 11 in your squad, or do you want impact players from the bench that's going to completely change the way you want to play? And do you want to be adaptable to play different ways against different opponents? Which means that you need to, obviously have lots of different roles that you're scouting for. So I'm very much a role based, not necessarily talking about left backs and right backs, and more are they attacking full backs? Are they inverted full backs? Are we looking like, what do you need in your squad? So once you've established that, then that's important, and that's you can make all of your decisions off the back of that. So then you can create profiles in your data recruitment process with whatever data provider you have. Even if
Mm-hmm.
you've just got a basic account which only shows your event data, you can still create something from that event data which will guide you in the right direction in terms of how that player has performed. And this is the advantage of data, of course, is that you can go over a whole season, you can go over 5 years, you can go as far back as the player's
Yeah.
career is, to see how he's performed in the role, like in the role profile that you've created. As long as you've weighted things correctly and you've taken some time to, hopefully with your head coach involved, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to be, using
They
them
got
on
to
the
play
pitch.
them or not. Yeah, they use them or they
Yeah,
don't.
exactly. And we've all seen Moneyball, and I'm sure you've probably mentioned it on this podcast a few times. Sometimes the differences between your recruitment and your coaching staff can make or break how successful what you're
Yeah.
doing is. And if you can get everybody on board, then that's better. I mean, and also with the medical staff and this whole kind of club approach, and especially with the ownership. So, the owners are going to be the ones paying the bill for it. So you've got to be able to like say there's some kind of structure to this and some ideas behind it.
Hmm.
So I would have that. And then you can use that kind of data profile and go out there into your data system, whatever you've got, and find some interesting players and get some long lists together and start to then say to video scouts, all right, well, these are the interesting players that we've got. Let's see if the data kind of marries up to the way that they do actually play the game.
Mm.
Get a few different matches under their belts in terms of the difficulty levels, the different scenarios that they want to play in. Make sure that your scout report kind of like either highlights things that you don't know about the player or gives you a good, well-rounded look at what the player can do. And then, in your regular meetings, and especially building up towards a transfer window, you can move some of these players from your long list into your short list. You can
Yep.
start then divvying out the right matches for the live scouts to go and watch. And you're reducing the number of players that your live scouts then need to cover. And so hopefully you're being more effective in the way that you're doing things. So, once you've got then your live scouts, you've got all of the evidence that you're going to need to then go into these meetings with the director of football and the head coach and the head of recruitment and all of this. And you can put together, who, your lists, yeah, who you want to target with it. And you can't just have one player. This is what I found being in a club is that 9 times out of 10, that player is unattainable for whatever reason, unless you are
Exactly.
Manchester
And
United or
that's
Real
that's
Madrid.
the aspect that's wild to me about like scouting and recruitment, because you start with every footballer, running around on two legs, even some of the one-legged ones in the circus in the third division of Kazakhstan, or who knows, right? You punch in your data filters, you're identifying your profiles, you got your list, but then the other piece, and you mentioned this specifically, like, yes, there's the coach. Will the coach play them or not? You mentioned Moneyball. Art Howe, the manager in that movie or book, whichever way you consume it, was not a fan. Ultimately, they're like, well, it's our way or hit the road. So yeah, there's that element. But then you mentioned the owner, and that ultimately is like the financial piece that can make or break things, right? Like the financial piece. And I know you've had experience with like financial modeling. I'm really curious about that. Like, obviously, it's can we get the deal done? Talking with agent, talking with the club, what do they want for it? But then is there an element of like, what is his salary going to be compared? Does this affect like the full salary of the team? Obviously, you guys start to talk, right? And then they're like, oh, they want higher wages because they realize, the guy who's not playing is getting X amount. Then there's obviously a thought of what can we sell this player on for? What's potential upside? Like, are there calculations for that of like best case scenario, worst case scenario that in fact impact like those contract talks and negotiations?
Yeah, 100%. Like, or at least there should be if you want to run an efficient ship. And
Yeah.
efficiency it's impossible to achieve 100% efficiency, but obviously you've still got to aim for us to be as efficient as possible because that means that you are using your resources to your maximum, and especially for clubs, clubs that don't have that kind of resource, like you mentioned Mbappe. Like, obviously, if you're doing your modeling, your positional profile modeling, and you're not getting Mbappe in your top few forwards, then you've got to question your model. But like you say, you've then got to figure out, right, okay, well, I've only got this kind of wage profile, and chances are you don't have the wage data, so you don't necessarily know what the players want is
Right.
on, and it's certainly not what he's asking for. But you need to have a top limit in your negotiations, and this comes then way outside of my like realms of expertise in terms of actual negotiation. But at the same time, I can picture like we do know some of this stuff as recruitment staff because you need to know like kind of like what level are we looking at here? Are we looking to
Yep.
try and recruit from these players who usually earn around about X amount, or are we actually looking kind of in the bargain basement, or should we say hidden gems, untried players, like all of
Hmm.
these euphemisms that get banded around for you haven't really got any money, so you're gonna have to dig something out of somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but absolutely. And in terms of modeling, like yes, you should do it, and there's you should certainly kind of like have a model that's informing your practice. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot of it down to human resources and how you deal with it. Like you just touched on it there in your question about the politics of the dressing room almost. Like
Hmm.
if you're bringing in somebody and you're paying them X amount, then what does
Yeah.
that do to the player that is used to be the
Yeah.
highest earner? Is
Yeah.
that they got a clause in their contract that means they have to then match the next. So then are you actually like then you've got to think about, right, I'm actually increasing my wage budget by £10,000 rather than the five that I thought I
Exactly.
was because I forgot
Yeah.
about this clause.
Hmm.
So, and then not to mention, like I say, all of the actual relationships within the dressing room and how that's going to impact on the pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's super fascinating. It's really cool. And do you see, like, within you're probably going to have, here's where I'll put this, right? Because you said my whole life, you literally said it in the beginning, like my whole life is kind of based around football and maths, right? And data. So obviously you believe in data. And I hesitate a little bit to ask this question because I don't want it to be like it's almost like I think we've moved a little bit past the transitional point, but it's almost like this old school football versus the new tech of like, and that divide, right? And that discussion. And I think obviously football, as the world is moving in the direction of data, like we just mentioned, there's so many elements of any situation of recruitment, of negotiating that are like human, relational, emotional things, right? So the data is like a great servant, but leads to that. Do you think right now, again, I'm asking it from an ignorant place probably, do you think right now data is being valued in football too much, too little, or like Goldilocks just right?
I don't like this adversarial position that seems to have been taken up. You're right to
Yeah.
identify it because I see it every day. In terms of I've got people on one side where it's like you need to be watching the player. You've got to like have traditional scouts and actually it's interesting because I think Brighton in the last few weeks have moved on a few of their like what they would call traditional scouts or at least the people in favor of having more automation and more intelligence, artificial intelligence
Mm.
in their model. It's a very difficult relationship to try and get right. And but everything, like in my opinion, everything in the world kind of actually boils down to human relationships and the way that like people, coexist together and making that as harmonious as possible because it's all about what happens on the pitch, and
Mm.
that is fundamentally done by the people on the pitch, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so everything that you're working towards, all the data it should be a support. You mentioned the word support there. It's something. It's scaffolding. It's things that is informing you in a certain way. But let me tell you something as well, or you can have the best data system in the world, but it still also relies on who set it up and why, and what your inputs are to get the right
Mm.
outputs. So if you've got a data system which you're relying on for your recruitment, but you've made a mistake in the implementation of it, or you've not quite understood what the style of play that you're trying to achieve is, and you're finding the wrong type of players, and you're going, these are the players that we need. And the system is like telling us this, then it's not going to work. And the problem is, you're not going to know it's not working until the results go bad, or you're 4 or 5 years down the line, and you've got a squad that's completely not fit for purpose.
Hmm.
So, the human decision making on things, as much as I love the data, and I'm not a slave to the data. I will, you know, create things that I think are going to help me and that are going to help the people that I'm working for. But at the end of the day, if your state system is saying that this centre forward is going to improve your output by zero point 0.1 goal per 90, which is great, because some systems do go that far into like predicting how, effective this signing will be for you. There's no way of actually knowing if where's the proof of that. It's going to be
Mm.
like on the pitch, and then if you've brought them in, but the children can't settle in school, or they've fallen out with their teammates, or God forbid, something terrible has happened in their personal life, you know, so the model can't compute any of that sort of stuff.
Yes.
So you've
Yes.
got to have that support mechanism in. And this is the thing about what I'm trying to do in terms of bringing in players from international shores to the UK is that I'm telling clubs, yeah, these players I think are going to be good enough, and I've got a data system and I've got visual confirmation of that with my scouting team. But
Hmm.
what you need to be able to provide to this player is, are they going to be comfortable coming to your club? Have you got a support mechanism for them? Have they got somewhere to live? All of this
100%.
sort of stuff.
It's so fascinating, like the way you describe that, and that was a really amazing answer that I appreciated, and kind of helped to kind of elucidate some of maybe my more like unconscious kind of thoughts about the relationship with data and football. But I think the interesting part of it too is like when it comes to making these decisions of, especially like you said in the case of like international players, yeah, it's almost like the data allows you to create like pool to choose from. It gives you those options. It sends you in the right direction, but still you have to rely on, some might say, your intuition, your instinct, your experience, like that personal touch to actually make the final decision. So it's a kind of like a refreshing way to look at it of like, hey, this sets the table, and now you just choose.
Yeah, I mean, there was such thing as good recruitment before computers, before anything. There was such thing as good recruitment and that came from people's intuition, experience, and anyone who wants to do away with all of that, I think, is probably making a mistake. Because there are things in this world that transcend like data and computers and calculations. Emotion is still the most important thing to a human experience, and
Mhm.
we are all part of that, whether we like it or not. And you have to get that right. Like, how many successful teams do we see that aren't very, like, that don't have that? Like, I think of Real Madrid, for instance, the most successful club team in the history of football, and as they, how many Champions Leagues have they won recently where they've been not winning on the XG, or like they've been but they've got that spirit and that
Yeah.
almost like mentality and that relationship with each other. And Carlo Ancelotti kind of brings that together. He says himself he's not the greatest tactician, he's not the greatest with data, but what he is able to do is to bring a group of players together. And obviously, it helps that they've got the budget to bring in amazing
Yeah.
players. I get
Yeah.
that, but they still have that thing where they can just use that spirit to get them to where they need to go. So we can't like go too far away from that. Yes, we use data. Yes, we use analytics and AI and all of that sort of stuff to build that up and to get in the right zone. But then you can't ignore all of these human factors as well. So yeah, like I say, I am a data recruitment expert, but at the same time, I understand that only goes so far.
Mhm.
So I feel like I'm trying to like give the best of both worlds to anybody that I work with, really. I'll just, yeah. So obviously, so the GBE Expert Hub is taking up a lot of my time at the moment. So I do have other things on today that require my attention. But I just wanted to speak a little bit more about kind of what we're doing and why I feel like this is important, and
Yeah.
like hopefully give some like value to your listeners as well. So obviously I've mentioned, I explained what kind of GBE is. So what we're trying to do is inform and entertain. So we've got this platform. I think, if I send you the link, you can put it in the show notes. People can go
Mhm.
to that for free and just see like kind of what articles are out there. There's a free membership that people can join, and they'll get monthly updates as to what's going on in that
Cool.
kind of the sphere, and get some information that way. And they'll also get to see some player reports that my team have done for free. So that should be something that people sign up to anyway. It's not going to cost you anything for the cost of an email in your inbox. So, and then there's also the paid tier. If people really do want to know a lot about what's going on, they don't have to work for a club. You can just pay the £5 a month. It helps to support us anyway. It helps to support our work, and you will get weekly updates, weekly player reports.
Mhm.
Um, you know, video and audio content and things like that. So that's the platform. And then there's also a kind of professional side of things. So if you do work for a club, or you're an agent, or you're a player, or you're an owner of a football club, and you're thinking, actually, I'd love to attack the British market, because as you've identified at the start of the podcast, like the Premier League has become this behemoth um, that is basically the place to go for football transfers. It actually they spent over €3 billion on transfers 2 seasons ago. We're on track for something similar this year, and that is the same as the next 3 leagues in a row. So
Wow.
it really is the place to be. So if you're wanting to attack that market, or something like that, then you can get in touch with us and we can advise you on that. So we know what the rules and regulations are. We know which clubs will be looking for players in the coming windows, and if you have players that might be able to hit that market, and it's actually a lot more wider than what most people will give it credit for now, especially since a new sort of legislation was brought in 2023. So like there are lots of different avenues, and that's basically that's basically what we have set up here, and we're trying to get some work in, really, so we can try and help as many people as possible. And like I say, it's about human connection as well. It's not about the amount of money that can be made. It's about, can you help people in their next steps to fulfilling what they need to do.
Really unique, like little niche that you're doing. And a lot of clubs don't have that extra bandwidth and time, especially clubs that are really looking for an advantage. They can't necessarily invest in like a full-time person or add the task to a already overtaxed staff member to do that. And you guys are obviously the GB experts, as the name says. So it's brilliant.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well,
Again, you've done this a lot today. You've hit the nail on the head, because, like, especially a lot. We'll think of the big clubs and the number of people that they employ and the amount of resource that they've got, but that doesn't apply across the board. And the lower down you go in the pyramid, the less time and the fewer resources are available. And we, for a reasonable price, we will like help you with like getting your recruitment sorted. And hopefully some of the ideas and philosophies that I've spouted over the last 49 minutes have been like interesting to some people. And I'd like to thank you for getting me on board, and
for
hopefully
sure.
people have enjoyed listening to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hopefully somebody, an EFL club or whoever can bring the next Brad Friedel over, the next Brad Friedel of their club, so get some more American talent or whatever it is. We'd love to see
We're
that.
absolutely out there.
But before we let you go, Andy, last thing that we wrap up all our episodes with, I want to hear from you. Could you complete the sentence, because football?
Because football is the lifeblood of my life and a lot of people's lives out there, and we should try and support it in any way that we can.
Awesome. Brilliant, man. Appreciate it, Andy. It's really cool what you guys are doing. To everyone interested, gonna link, like, definitely check out is LinkedIn. They've been sharing all the data, so there's a lot of good stuff there, and I'll link to the website and everything too. Sign up on the newsletter. I'm gonna go pop in the newsletter list myself to keep abreast of what you guys are up to. But Andy, thanks so much, man, and best of luck with the new venture. Hopefully we can connect in the future and be able to reflect on some more of the good work you guys have done.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that, and thank you again for having me on.
Everyone, thanks for listening or watching wherever you're getting this. Check out Andy's work. Watch the next episode of Because Football. We appreciate your time and attention. See you on the next one. Peace.